Well, hello, everybody. It's so nice to meet you. What a pleasure. So I'm just going to jump right in because I understand that you prefer to have a short presentation style thing and then have some question and answer. Is that about right?
Just do your thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're in charge.
Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So now you can see my slides. And I just use these as a guide for myself because otherwise I go off in different tangents and ask questions and then we kind of lose track of where we're going. And in limited time, I'm just going to go with the slides. So let's start with the basics of why do we remember certain stories that people tell us. And one of the things that always pops into my head is when we share stories with our kids about when we were kids. And one of the things that always resonates with an audience is a story that I share about an experience I had when my older son was 6 weeks old. And we were sitting on the couch. I had just gotten back from work. I was working full-time at NSA. So I was implementing PeopleSoft, this ridiculous human resource management software at NSA at the Baltimore campus. And I was driving an hour each way to work. And I'd get home and the baby would nurse and he wouldn't stop nursing until I left the next morning for work. And I will never forget getting home one evening, and the commute, of course, is really pleasant. Yeah, really pleasant. And I walked up my 3 flights of stairs into our apartment, and Jacob was nursing, and I was sitting on the couch, and my husband hadn't gotten home yet from work. And I'm nursing and I'm looking down and there's this beautiful face looking up at me. He has these huge brown eyes, eyelashes that when he closes his eyes goes down to his cheekbones, and just this perfectly round face. And I burst into tears and I called my mother and I'm weeping. I'm having a hard time even speaking to my mom. And of course, my mom overreacts because that's what she does. And she's a nurse. So she just assumes that I'm going through some sort of postpartum depression. And she's very concerned. What happened? What happened? How's the baby? What happened? And of course, I tried to calm her down. Mom, it's fine. I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. And of course, she doesn't see me cry very often. I'm just not much of a crier. So this is really upsetting to her. So finally, I come out with these words as I'm looking down at this beautiful face of this amazing baby. And I didn't even want kids, so this is all surprising to me. I looked down and I said to my mother, "Now I know how much you love me." And I tell that story to our children, our 2 sons, and that's meaningful to them. So why is it meaningful to them? Any guesses about why that would be meaningful?
Because it's personal, right? Because it's about them too.
It is, but I can share that story with any audience and draw them into my story. Even if you don't have kids, you can feel the emotion behind a story like that. So why do we remember them? Because they tug at our heartstrings, and also because I'm exposing just a little bit of vulnerability. One of the things that drives me crazy is that storytelling is suddenly a buzzword. Storytelling has been around since the beginning of time, since the beginning of humanity. So for it to suddenly be, oh, everything's all about storytelling kind of bothers me. And the reason that bothers me so much is that storytelling has always been a piece of communication. It's not its own thing. It's like the people that suddenly jump on board with the employee engagement buzz phrase. And it's not its own thing. You can't have employee engagement without good management. You can't have employee engagement without strong marketing skills and good sales skills. It's all a component of something much broader. So when you hear people talking about storytelling as a tool for business, don't ever slide into that belief that storytelling is the one thing that's going to solve all your problems. So the reason storytelling works in business is because we aren't selling to a business, we're selling to a person. And anyone who says it's not personal is not telling the truth, because everything's personal. Everything that we do is personal. How I speak, how I engage with somebody, how I look in their eyes, how I touch them on the arm, all of that is personal. And when we are trying to sell something to somebody, the better our relationship with that person, the stronger the connection we can make, the more likely it is we're going to close that sale. Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to create that relationship and to make that connection, we have to create a space where we can build it. And that's where storytelling can come in and can be just a super useful tool. When we tell stories, it shares a lot about who we are as people. And it also can change the perception of others around us. So I can tell a story that might surprise people about something that I did in my youth or a mistake that I made just a few weeks ago. And the way that I share that story is going to impact how you see me, your perceptions of me. And I think everybody agrees with that, because how many times have you been listening to somebody else's story and suddenly you're reminded of something that happened to you that you want to share? And raise your hand if you stopped listening to their story because you were thinking about how to present your own.
Makes sense.
Yeah, everybody does that. So the benefit to this is that if you are good at sharing a short story that catches your audience's attention, you can draw out their stories. And as a person that is trying to sell something, whether that's in an interview or selling a product or encouraging a team to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do, if you can draw out their stories, you develop a connection like no other connection. So everybody's heard the other buzz phrase, personal brand, right?
Yeah.
And that gets kind of annoying too. So the word I use is reputation, because it's basically the same thing. And your reputation is what's going to build your relationship. And in order to build a relationship, sharing some level of vulnerability through a story can definitely connect you in a different way than what you would do otherwise. The traditional, so what do you do question, that doesn't connect you with anyone. And the whole idea of the 30-second elevator pitch, that doesn't work for me unless it's actually a story that connects me to the person. Why do I care? So telling stories is a really easy way to demonstrate our brand. And the way that I work through this kind of activity with people, with a group, is we start with, what are the qualities, what are the characteristics that you want people to know about you? So if you're looking down at your paper and you think about the words you want people to use at the end of a conversation with you, think about the words compassionate, generous, competent, professional. I would want people to use the word generous with me. That's one of my value words. So, and I don't mean just generous financially, because sometimes I can't be, but I mean generous spiritually, emotionally. I love to feed people. I love to nourish people. So when people leave my house, that's what I want them to remember about me. So think about 3 words that you would want people to use to describe you. I'm going to give you just a few seconds. There are a lot more than 3. So just start with 3. Kind.
No, that's not me.
No, I was thinking Lori's not sweet. That's not her word.
Not
Yeah,
sweet.
no.
It's the opposite of sweet. Let's play that game. Tart.
You know, the thing that I would use for Lori beside direct is I would actually use the word compassionate, because she's not going to tell you something that she doesn't think you need to hear. And I find that to be a compassionate thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. I wouldn't even think of the word compassionate to describe me.
I think I know that.
Hey, got my 3 words, but I'll tell you something. My daughter is, and I just was talking to somebody about this the other day, talking about she's such a great kid, Sabrina. I don't even, sometimes can't even believe she's my own kid because she has all of the stuff that I don't have, honestly.
Well, I think a lot of our kids do that to us. My younger son is one of the ones that's super aware of the people around him and very wise. And there are some things that he says that just totally catch me off guard. And I think, how did he get so wise?
Yeah, I know.
So you have sorry, what was that, Lori?
I got my 3 words.
Okay, so you have your 3 words. Now, the simple way that most people define themselves or define their job or define their service or product that they offer is that they tell you what it is. They say, this is a pen and it's going to serve you really well. But if you can demonstrate what it is rather than tell people, they're going to more likely believe you. So for instance, if I tell people I'm a really good cook, who's going to believe me? No one in that room that you're sitting in is going to believe that I'm a good cook. I have to demonstrate it. I have to show you pictures. I could show you a video of me cooking something. I could have other people saying, oh my gosh, I had matzo ball soup last year at Passover and it was the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. That's how I demonstrate my brand. And the easiest way to do that is by telling a story. So when you heard my story about my son and my mother and saying, oh my gosh, now I finally know how much you love me, what does that tell you about me and my brand?
I'm trying to pretend that, because if I said that to my mother, I'm really thinking about this. Because it's happened over the time where I've walked in on my daughter, she's in college now, even when she was in high school, and I would get very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
In bed. This is when she was 17. And I think it was because I went through a lot to get her. I still can't even believe she's my kid. And I think if you're asking me to use transference, and I was to call my mom and say, Mom, I understand now how much you love me, I think it was because in that moment, I really understand what the word love is, and that you probably can't love anybody more in life, even your own husband or your wife, more than you love your child. I think that's what I would take from that.
Mm-hmm. So what my value word is love. And when you walk away from me, you're going to say that woman really is loving or loves deeply or loves generously. But even more importantly, I just demonstrated that I'm a storyteller. I drew you right in. You heard the story, but you also saw the story. You had an image of the story. You could imagine this small baby with big brown eyes. So I'm not telling you I'm a storyteller. I'm demonstrating it. So what makes a storyteller memorable? You know the actors and the stories that are memorable to you, but how do you make a storyteller memorable? And one of the things that always pops into my head when I think about that is somebody that can use humor, someone who expresses themselves with their eyes, with their face, with their smile. The best storytellers I know have millions of micro expressions as they're speaking, and they usually don't photograph very well because you take so many pictures and they all have this weird, micro expression, an eyebrow up, a lip like that, a weird smile. And it's because they have so many micro expressions. They're very emotional in their storytelling. Giving enough details, but not too much detail. So one of the worst habits of a storyteller is the run-on sentence. So my dad was notorious for this. He would give so much detail in a story that I would completely lose track of what he was trying to accomplish with this story. He would tell me the names of all his neighbors and their kids in the middle of a story about fixing his boat. And I would just look at him and be puzzled and forget, oh, was this about the boat? I don't even remember what this was about. So my brother once kind of called me on that, actually more than once, because brothers can be very honest, painfully honest.
No.
And one day I was telling a story and he said, Sarah, land the plane.
I love that. I'm using that.
Land the plane. So that is one of the worst habits. But the best habits, like I said, including some level of emotion, some level of vulnerability, and some concept that is going to connect you with your audience. So here are some of the things that I talk about. If you're going to be walking into a place and telling a story about a tattoo, you're probably not going to be wearing a suit. So I think it's really important to match your image with your story. And that doesn't mean if I'm telling a story that has to do with something that happened to me in the 70s, I'm not going to be wearing bell bottoms. But I am going to make sure that my image matches the story that I'm going to tell. And I always tell people, even men, I always say, start with your shoes. If you're going to go and present something, whether it's an interview or you're presenting to a customer, and you know you're going to tell specific stories that we'll talk about strategies for that later, make sure that if you start with your shoes, and these are the shoes that are comfortable, they make you feel confident, you know you can walk in them without teetering. For women in the room, you know the women that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And you're wearing shoes that can also be part of your story. I'm a big believer in image being a big part of how you present yourself. And that doesn't mean being picky about designer shoes or a designer dress or anything like that. I'm talking about being intentional with what you're wearing, matching what you're doing. So again, if you're applying for a job at a casual restaurant, walking in a suit is probably not a good idea. So if you're presenting to a group that's going to be relatively casual, if you show up dressed to the nines, they may dismiss you in those first few seconds. And you can get that back. You can build it back, but it's much easier to start with something that people can relate to. So, what stories do we share? I bet this is the meaty part that you were interested in, right?
Oh.
I hope.
Okay, I've already got questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, do you want to start with questions or do you want to start with a quick worksheet?
Yeah.
Okay. So the way that I usually do this with, say, a workshop is, and I'll just go through this. I don't expect you to work through it right now unless you want to start on it. But I always start with major life pivot points. One of the groups that I'm working with right now is the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana. And their leadership has decided that they're going to share their personal stories. And guess what they started with? I grew up in Montana. And then I went to college at University of Montana in Missoula. And that's where I met my wife. That's how they've decided to share their story. How much impact do they have with that? Yeah, it's pretty exciting, right? Woo, you grew up in Montana. Most everybody grew up in Montana if you're still here. So that's, so I always start with selecting eras in your life that you consider major pivot points. So for me, of course, I could say 7th grade was a major pivot point in my life. It was a time when I went from being very confident to completely losing my confidence. And I can tell you, freshman year of college was another major pivot point. It's kind of a counter pivot point to what happened in 7th grade. And then I can tell you that my senior year of college and my first year out of college, when I received a paid internship in Washington, D.C. and moved from Fort Collins, Colorado to Washington, D.C. for a paid internship, that year of my life was a major pivot point. So if we start there, then we can dig deeper. And that's where, if you are, let's say you're looking at a spreadsheet, this is a worksheet that I use sometimes with my clients. I put the era across the top of a spreadsheet, across the top of the columns. So 7th grade would be at the top of the column. And then on the left side, I would put story 1, story 2, story 3, story 4, etc. And in that top story under 7th grade, under story 1, I could put a phrase or a full sentence to jog my memory about something specific that happened in 7th grade. So I can say 7th grade was a major pivot point for me, and I lost all my confidence there. But again, I'm not demonstrating anything by saying that. But if I tell you that one day, 7th grade, I told my best friend that I thought this boy that I liked me. Woohoo, he liked me. And he was cute. He was so cute. And she said, I don't know why, Sarah, you're not very pretty. And I remember vividly going home and almost every night like this, walking up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door, and just hiding myself in my bedroom, devastated. And for the millionth time that year, my mother comes up and knocks on the door and says, what's going on? What's going on? And she hears this deep sobbing. This is why I don't cry much anymore, is because 7th grade took it all out of me. I have nothing left. But there I was, you know, trying to get myself together. My mom says, come down for dinner and let's talk about it. So I remember sitting at the dining room table, and my mother told my dad and my brother, my younger sister, what happened. And my dad and brother just burst out laughing. So to a 7th grade girl, that wasn't, she's so stupid. She's just saying that because she's jealous. That was, oh, well, that's pretty funny. Maybe she's right. That's what a 7th grade girl hears when she hears laughter about a story that has devastated her. And through the whole time at the dinner table, I never remember hearing my dad and brother say, she's wrong. So that's a very specific story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it also clearly demonstrates what happened in 7th grade. And that's just one of many incidents that colored who I was for many years. So you can start to fill out that, I call it a story portfolio, with just a phrase or a sentence in those boxes of specific incidents, a specific conversation you had, a specific adventure that you had, a road trip, what happened on that road trip, your labor story. If you're a woman who has had a child, every woman has a labor story who has had a child, positive or negative. Consider some specific, sharing has paused. Sorry. So try to be specific, and you won't use all of these stories, but the nice thing is once you figure out which audiences to share them with, then when somebody says, tell me a story about, you won't hesitate. So raise your hand if somebody has said, tell me a story about, and you've frozen. None of you?
No.
Oh my gosh. This is a different group then. The last group I spoke to, 90% of the people raised their hand. So a lot of people really struggle with figuring out which story to share because they don't have a collection of them in their minds that are applicable to any situation. So we can share stories all different ways. I'm not going to get into detail there. And this is just all the pictures that I could share stories and include images. So going back a slide, if you're looking at this, one of the things that really makes a story powerful is adding images to it. So anytime I write a story, blog a story, anytime I share a story, if I can have images associated with it, that is really helpful. And it's not so much the image, it's the connection of the image to the story. So people just remember it better that way. Does that make sense to everybody? The other thing I often will add to a blog post or a story that I share is music. So the podcast that's going to be released next Tuesday is about applying lessons in performing music to activities in your professional life. And one of the songs that came up, I embedded a link to that song so that people could listen to what I had referred to during the podcast. So the last thing is, when you're sharing a story, sometimes it's going to be imperfect. You're going to fail. It's going to flop. And the most important thing in that situation is to be watching your audience. If you notice that they are leaning back, crossing their arms, doing one of these, then you know you need to either switch direction or end the story. And that, again, is part of that knowing the failure of a story and identifying it and then trying a totally different tact on it next time. So that's what I have for slides. I'm going to stop the screen sharing unless you need anything. I don't know why it's not. My mouse disappeared.
Technology is a wonderful thing.
It really is. I just love it.
I can't help you from here.
Well, my mouse isn't.
That's
Very...
Well, at least it's not a bad image to get stuck on. So.
There we go. Stop share.
Hey.
All right, so we're back.
Yeah.
I'm ready. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one. So these three, the value words, and I like that. That's a lot to think about. So what the purpose of that, in other words, is to figure out the three words and then somehow use them in a post, in an article,
I would suggest demonstrating them. So in other words, find a story from your past that demonstrates that. So if I want to demonstrate generosity of spirit, I might talk about the volunteering that I did with the Women's Leadership Network. I might tell a story about it. Again, using the words, you can't define your personal brand. It's like McDonald's trying to tell you they're a healthy place to get food.
Right.
You know, they can tell you that, but they have to demonstrate it to make it real.
Where I get confused, I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way. Like, I didn't know how to articulate the question. I get confused with that word storytelling. You see a lot of it now, storytelling marketing or storytelling branding. It's sort of, it's like you say it's a buzzword, and I understand it intellectually, like when you see a Budweiser commercial, I mean, right away, you get goosebumps, you see the American flag or the Clydesdale horses. I mean, you know what it's about. And then, oh yeah, they sell beer. That to me is storytelling. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
But what I don't understand as a small business owner, how does that apply to me? How do I, because that storytelling for me is either A, like I wrote in my post, once upon a time there lived a princess in a castle, or it's, as you alluded to earlier, it's the handing down from one generation to the next. History. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I'm finding it hard to apply storytelling in my own business.
Let's start with the first basic thing. You help a lot of people. You help people create a life that they want to live. So sharing a story about one of your clients, obviously not using their name, but saying, here's what happened with this client. He came to me because of this. And this was his result.
I think, Sarah, to that point, right, for somebody like Lori, helping demonstrate or prepare a narrative that will, if she does a consultation and go, yeah, I don't think I need it. Then it's really storytelling time about the family she helped or the person she helped who was able to go to their kid's prom and was healthier and didn't need to worry about, not fitting in her dress and all this other crap that they worry about, right? So I think that's how I would tell the story, because I think about it all the time in my business, right? We tell stories, it's just that I'm not intentional enough with it. So if I script it and then I can have 2 or 3 stories, that's where I think it'll help me big time. Like, why should somebody buy life insurance? Why should somebody invest their money?
It's like I never thought about that before. That's really great. I mean, I post a lot, and I'm always educating, I'm always informing, the 3 words that I wrote to describe myself that I really want people to, if I had to pick them, would be passionate, honest, knowledgeable. And I think I demonstrate that all the time with the way I write. I just let it all hang out there. But you're right about that, because I'm serious, I'm not just stroking you, because I'm relocating my office next week, and as I was boxing up a lot of my folders, to move over, especially my clients who are already on stabilization and maintenance that I haven't seen in a while, I'm serious. I went through their folders just to remind myself, and I did become overwhelmed sometimes, like saying, wow, look at the change in that person. Mm-hmm. And then you hear about them through the community, like how they're doing. Oh, she got engaged and she's married now, and I never write about that. I just
and that's just
because I've always felt that I would be sharing too personal information, and that if, obviously you're right, I could never use somebody's name. I would have to call them Jane and John Doe. And then what stops me from that is that maybe people will think I'm full of shit, that I'm just making it up because I'm not using a real person's name. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so there are 2 parts to what you're suggesting. And the first one is start with one of their thank you notes. Look at a thank you note that you received and write the story about where that came from. And you can always ask them. If you've gotten a thank you note from a customer referral, ask them, I'd like to use your story. I won't use your name.